Now I'd like to welcome in our first keynote speaker of the day. It's going to be Jim Teague. Jim is Director and Co-CEO of Enterprise Products. Jim is on the board of the Greater Houston Partnership and was named 2020 Maritime Leader of the Year by the Greater Houston Port Bureau in recognition for his outspoken advocacy to improve the Houston Ship Channel. At this time, as Jim is coming over, I want to remind our audience, while Jim's making his comments, to put your questions in just below. And so at the conclusion of Jim's comments, we'll be able to interact with the audience via the Q&A. So be sure and type those questions in, and we'll try to get to as many of those as we possibly can. Welcome in, Jim. Appreciate you being here this morning. Appreciate everything that you do there at Enterprise, and really appreciate everything that you do for the whole region and the Houston Ship Channel. So at this time, I'll turn it over to you. I'll step away for a few minutes, and I'll pop back up after the end of your comments, and we'll have a little Q&A. So at this time, Jim, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Chad. Welcome to the Gulf Coast Industry Forum 2020 pandemic style. Thank you for allowing me to speak with you under these quite unusual circumstances. If you would allow me, I'm speaking from the Enterprise boardroom, and that portrait you see over my shoulder is our founder, Dan Duncan. And I'll jokingly say, he's been gone 10 years, but he's still looking over our shoulders. Today, I'd like to take a moment and talk a little bit about beautiful bodies of water. And if you would bear with me, there is some method to my madness. I've seen a lot of beautiful bodies of water. I've been to the beach in the south of France. I've been to the beach in Jeddah in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Trust me, the attire in the south of France is totally different than the beaches at Jeddah. I've been to a beach in Vung Tau, Vietnam, in the Bahamas, and of course, California, Florida, Galveston, Hilton Head, as well as Thailand, Panama, Costa Rica, and Hawaii. But as beautiful as these beaches and these places are, I don't think any of those waters are as beautiful as the waters of the Houston Ship Channel. The Ship Channel was the catalyst that created the fourth largest and most diverse city in the United States. It was the catalyst that built the world's largest refining and petrochemical center and cemented Houston's position as the energy capital of the world. At Enterprise, we're quite proud to have a significant stake on the Houston Ship Channel, and every Houstonian has a vested interest in the Ship Channel. And we're at a critical point that will determine the Ship Channel's future. I don't think Houston would be Houston without that Ship Channel. No other waters that I'm aware of have created as much commerce as the Ship Channel. The channel is busier than the ports of Los Angeles, Long Beach, and New York City combined. Every year, the Ship Channel handles 9,000 ships, 71,000 tugs and barges, and 38,000 ferries. There are 150 private terminals on the Ship Channel. They're probably worth over $200 billion. It's the #1 port by tonnage, and the Port of Houston estimates that the channel sustains over 2 million jobs. As busy as the channel is, it's only going to get busier in coming years. Over the last few years alone, the U.S. has gone from relying on the rest of the world to supply it with all types of hydrocarbons to being the largest producer of crude oil, natural gas, and natural gas liquids, and is now exporting these hydrocarbons to markets around the world. The U.S. is globally unique. We have a large resource base, but that resource base is backed by private property rights, clear rule of law, and open markets. It's a supply source that frankly will not be denied. Building off this resource base, the ship channel has taken a quantum leap by providing producers, petrochemicals, and refiners with a new level of access to consumers and markets around the world. The oil and gas products that move through the port and our petrochemicals make people's lives around the world better. And I'm going to give you one example of one hydrocarbon product that flows through the ship channel that makes a huge difference in people's life. Prior to our shale miracle, hundreds of millions of people around the world had no hope other than living impoverished in countries that cooked and heated with coal, wood, and animal waste with no other options. Before the shale miracle, hydrocarbons were too expensive. In many cultures, people are relegated to the menial task of gathering wood and agricultural products for a large part of their day just to be able to care for their families. Lives are cut short, and millions, including children, are victims of pollution inside their homes. Studies by the World Bank and the United Nations concluded that there is a direct correlation between energy use per capita and quality of life. Because of the shale miracle in the US, global LPG prices have fallen to a level that now makes it economic for many impoverished countries to convert homes to LPG. And over the last 10 years, 75% of the world's demand growth for clean burning LPG has come from the US, and the vast majority of that has come through the Houston Ship Channel. At Enterprise, we export more LPG than the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. These dynamics are rapidly being reversed as several governments have initiated programs to convert hundreds of millions of households to clean burning LPG. Since 2015, India has converted 100 million homes from coal, wood, and dung to LPG, with another 50 million targeted. Since 2017, Nigeria has converted 40 million homes. China's LPG demand has increased 60% as the government banned the use of coal. We've got a close friend who lives in Beijing, and he told me that his parents live in the central part of China. One day, government officials showed up. They took his parents' coal-burning stove, gave him a propane tank and $10. Says China's pretty serious about it. And people that use LPG, they never want to go back because of the cleanliness. Meanwhile, there's 1 billion people in sub-Saharan Africa that are still burning wood, coal, and dung. US LNG is also playing an increasing role worldwide, especially for power generation in poor nations. Natural gas is expensive to ship, to receive, and distribute, which for the most part makes it tough to distribute to the population, but ideal for large-scale electric generation in poor nations. LPG is much cheaper to ship, far more portable. All you have to do is fill your propane tank and carry it home. None of these conversions happen without US shale and its abundance of crude oil, natural gas, and natural gas liquids, a large majority of which flows through the Houston Ship Channel for export. Because of the US shale, industry global energy prices have fallen substantially, and our import-export balances for crude oil, refined products, and NGLs have moved from imports to exports, which continue to grow. In 2008, the US spent $400 billion importing hydrocarbons. Today, we're a net exporter of hydrocarbons. Last but not least, because of the abundance of shale feedstocks, our petrochemical industry has moved from being a marginal, demand-dominated player to being the global leader. Today, the US is by far the largest ethylene producer in the world at 90 billion pounds a year, which is up from 50 billion pounds a year just a few years ago. If Texas were a country, it would be the largest ethylene producer in the world. In 10 short years, the U.S. has moved from decades of being a desperate oil and gas importer into the global leader in oil and gas production. But then we hit a bump in the road. Mid-March, our world turned upside down, and we were invaded by what President Trump calls an invisible enemy, or COVID-19. And you all remember this. Schools closed. Heck, the Houston Rodeo shut down halfway through. Airline traffic came to a dead stop. Refineries cut back to about 65%, and crude traded for a negative $37 a barrel. OPEC, who at the time was flooding the world with oil, finally came to their senses and cut 10 million barrels a day to try to stabilize global oil markets. Demand literally fell off a cliff. I've heard lost demand numbers ranging from 20 to 25 million barrels a day, almost overnight. However, U.S. exports of liquid hydrocarbons generally fared much better than what we saw in the global demand estimates. LPG export demand for things like cooking and home heating held up well, evidence of its human needs characteristics. Throughout the pandemic, our LPG export facilities on the ship channel have been full, and our crude oil exports have remained strong. The most recent EIA data on crude oil exports show record exports for July in the middle of a pandemic. The last 6 months have been the worst industry downturn in my career. But I've learned, or maybe confirmed what I already suspected. The world wants U.S. gas, U.S. NGLs, U.S. crude oil, and U.S. petrochemicals. Our industry is always going through cycles, but I don't know if it's fair to call a global pandemic another cycle. The shutdown and the velocity of the shutdown during the financial crisis of 2009 stands out as bad, but early on it was clear that governments and central banks were focused on various levels of corrective action to get our global banking system stable. Then came the oil price crash of 2015-16 when we thought $26 crude was bad. But April the 20th, 2020 showed us it was just child's play compared to having to pay someone $37 to take your barrel of crude oil. COVID has been much worse than both of these cycles because early on, COVID seemed completely out of our control, immediately threatened millions of lives and rocked economies around the world. It came on us so quick, it was like the world stepped into a black box. But I'm old enough to know that this is not the first time in my lifetime we have been invaded by an invisible enemy. As a little boy, I remember the most feared disease of the 20th century. It's called polio. Struck without warning. It paralyzed and it killed. It put people in something called an iron lung to support their breathing. People who got polio were isolated from others. My mom, who was a nurse, caught polio, and I remember standing outside the hospital with my 3 little brothers and my dad so we could see her and wave to her through a window. Mitigation steps were taken. Swimming pools and movie theaters were closed during polio season, which was typically the summer. We weren't allowed to go to public playgrounds. In effect, we practiced our own kind of social distancing. But there's one thing we didn't do. We didn't shut down the entire U.S. economy, losing tens of millions of jobs in 6 weeks. Just as we learned to cope with polio, we are learning to cope with COVID. Early on at Enterprise, at mid-March, we went to a skeleton staff in our headquarters consisting of management, our marketing teams, and some of our operating people, with everyone else working from home. We made adjustments to be able to open back up our headquarters business, protecting our employees, using social distancing guidelines in common areas, including elevators, coffee bars, and installing plexiglass around the building. Biggest change we made was requiring face coverings at all times, unless you are eating or drinking or alone in an office or a conference room. I was amazed at how quickly we adjusted. We also had a steady stream of employee communications, including several that emphasize that none of these measures work unless each of us also take personal responsibility in the decisions we make while we are away from work. Since mid-June, we have been fully staffed in our headquarters offices, and our case count has been minimal, thanks to the safety measures put in place and our people accepting personal responsibility. I'm seeing signs of a recovery. Looking at our dock schedules, demand for many of our products has returned to pre-COVID levels. Asia likes our crude, they need our NGLs, and they also like our olefins, including the Gulf Coast's abundant supply of ethylene, for which our new export terminal at Morgan's Point on the ship channel is completely sold out, with volumes headed to Latin America, Europe, and Asia. Petrochemicals are also reporting strong demand for their derivative products, especially ethylene, driven in part by new individual serving type products as the world deals with the pandemic. Propylene is similarly in strong demand to manufacture badly needed PPE. Bob Patel, the CEO of Lyondell, probably said it best on Lyondell's second quarter earnings call when he said, "The pandemic has generated a renewed appreciation for the value of our chemical and polymer products for society." That is certainly playing out in real time and highlights the global significance of the ship channel today. However, in the long run, the ship channel will become increasingly critical for exports as U.S. demand for hydrocarbons has likely reached its peak, especially compared to our ability to consume what we produce. The ship channel will continue to be the epicenter in providing hydrocarbon exports. U.S. energy is absolutely essential in raising standards of living around the world and improving and saving lives. I strongly believe that we need to get about the business of planning for the future. For those that you don't know, local funding has become very important as we head down what is now a critical path of deepening and widening the Houston Ship Channel as soon as possible. We have had recent success in Washington with the House WRDA passage and fully expect a favorable outcome for the companion bill sitting in the Senate. We greatly appreciate the efforts of the commissioners of the Port of Houston, of Roger Gunther, the executive director, and of Rick Campo, the chairman. Deepening and widening of the ship channel on an expedited basis is critical to all local stakeholders and industries. It's also important to our newfound energy security. And frankly, it's critical to our national security in more ways than most of us can imagine. As the father of an Army officer who spent 15 months in Iraq, take my word for it, U.S. energy security matters. And I sincerely hope that none of you ever have to take that car ride to drop your son or daughter off at the airport for deployment to the Middle East. These people that want to ban fracking or adopt this so-called Green New Deal are either naive or totally dishonest. We would make countries that don't like us richer, as energy prices would go up dramatically. Russia would love for the U.S. to ban fracking. There's no way you could afford to put sanctions on Iran because the world would need their oil. Saudi Arabia would be much richer, and we would be kissing the ring of their king again. That woman in India, well, she'd continue to cook with wood, coal, and dung because hydrocarbons would be too expensive. Remember what I said. The UN and World Bank concluded that there is a direct correlation between energy use per capita and quality of life. People who live in poverty around the world, they want what we have. And these anti-hydrocarbon initiatives are really saying you can't have a better quality of life. These anti-fossil fuel initiatives will ensure that our military involvement in the Middle East will increase in order to guarantee the free flow of oil from that region. What does that mean? It means once again, we'll be sending our children to a part of the world that is run by despotic regimes that don't share our values. The world's population at nearly 8 billion people has doubled since 1975, and we're still adding 1 billion people every 12 years, most of them in underdeveloped nations who all want what we have. I'll close today by reminding you that what you are doing is making a real difference, not just to our country, but to human beings around the world who want and need the things that you have. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise. Our Shell miracle is making people's lives better, and the Houston Ship Channel is the artery that's making that possible. With that, Chad, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate that. That's a fantastic overview, and you touched on quite a few points. And I see that we've got some questions coming in from the audience, and we've got a couple of minutes still left here. So I want to try and toss a couple of questions to you, and see if you can interact with the audience here a little bit. I like this one. First question. This is from Andrea French over at Teague, and I really can appreciate this question. So because your history and the knowledge that you've got, her question is this: how do we ensure that this rich depth of knowledge for the history of this industry is passed on to influence current and future policy decision makers?
What I see in Washington, I wonder if that's possible. But, I think we spend a lot of time in D.C. ourselves. I'm looking at Bob Sanders, and God knows he was up and down the stairwells in D.C. a lot, as some of our lobbyists. But you got to talk to people up there. We had Joe Manchin, who was a moderate Democrat in our offices here not too long ago, and we spent a couple of hours with the guy, and trust me, he gets it, and that's important since he is the minority leader on the Senate Energy Resources Committee. So I think you gotta talk to people. You gotta explain the industry to them. I tell you, a good thing to point out to them is watch Planet of the Humans. You can YouTube it. Of all people, Michael Moore. It's an hour and 40 minutes worth spending.
Very good. It's all about relationships. Once you have a good relationship with somebody, you can help educate them as to what the reality is down here, on the ground. That's been our motto. So another good question here. It's been obvious to anybody in the region that the stakeholders for the entire region, and you mentioned a lot of them, with the port, with the commissioners, with our industry partners, with the Coast Guard, with the Corps of Engineers, the whole region has done a good job of working together to really fast track the widening of the ship channel. How will, just in your words, how will that widening project work to keep us competitive here in Houston on the Gulf Coast and in the global market as far as moving oil-related products?
Chad, you just went silent.
Y'all lose me.
Yeah.
There you go. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now. I lost you for a minute.
No problem. The quick question is this: how will, everybody's done a good job working together on the widening project, all the stakeholders in the region. How will that widening project, when we actually widen the channel, how does that keep us competitive? What's the physical nature of that widening project that makes it good for us here in Houston?
Well, a lot of the products we export are daylight restricted, so I think that moves that where daylight is deemed up to Barber's Cut instead of the mouth of the ship channel, which makes it possible for us to export more product. I think the other thing it does is it makes it possible for the container business, which has grown quite substantially, to bring in bigger container ships and retain two-way traffic. So I think both industries grow with this widening.
Very good. Very good. This is a kind of a quick one though, and you touched on it a little bit when you talked about our utilization in our refineries during the kind of the peak of the COVID restrictions and shutdowns. But what is our current, where are we currently on the global demand for crude on a daily basis, given kind of the current restrictions? And then do you think we'll return back to that 100 million barrels per day? And if so, when do you see us kind of getting back to what I would consider a normal consumption of crude oil products around the world?
Yeah, I'm not sure where we are globally on refined product demand. I know before the hurricane went through Lake Charles, our refineries were running about just over 80%. I'm more of an optimist than most. I think demand comes back sooner than a lot of consultants think it comes back. I think the second half of next year, I think you could see, I think demand will grow. I think the OPEC countries cannot afford to not comply with what they put in place. They can't stand crude prices going down. Their budgets are shot to hell. And so I'm personally think by the second half of next year, you're going to have a price signal across the board that are going to make our producers happy and our ship channel congested.
Very good, very good. And I'll ask this, and you can dodge this if you'd like. But you know, Enterprise Products has just really led the way with capital investment along the Houston Port region, really the entire Gulf Coast. How do you? What's your forecast on continued capital investment for this midstream to logistics and shipping out over the next? Let's look out 2 years and kind of look past this next 6 to 12 months. How do you see capital investment continuing, kind of not just for enterprise, but for the private sector in the oil and gas industry?
I think people are going to be a lot more disciplined in how they spend their money. I think we've spent a lot of our money now such that a lot of our expansions are incremental in nature. We've got an expansion of our capability to load LPG at probably, you know, it's pretty incremental, $150, $200 million. That gets us a lot more capacity. We're taking a hard look. I think we've announced that we are potentially building an offshore terminal for crude oil. We have an anchor shipper on that. And then in terms of pipelines, we recently announced that there's a pipeline we're not going to build. We figured out that we've got plenty of capacity, and we had an anchor customer ask to defer their commitments. And we work with our customers to make that happen. So I think people will be a lot more disciplined. At Enterprise, we've got some projects that we will do, some of them on the Houston Ship Channel. And we will, our job is to get more out of what we got. And that's what we're going to do.
Very good. Very good. Well, I appreciate your leadership, appreciate your straightforward comments. Everybody in the region kind of appreciates the way that y'all do business and the leadership that you've shown here. I really want to thank you for coming in today. The information that not only you, but the rest of our speakers will be able to pass through, I think can help us navigate, where to go over the next 6 months, the next 12 months. And that's really the goal of the conference. So I think we've got our questions answered. I want to thank you, Jim, for your time and for your crew and team over there at Enterprise Products for helping you be part of the conference this year. We really appreciate it, and we'll let you get back to work doing good things. So thank you very much, Jim.
Thank you, Chad.